When I saw Queer at TIFF, it was 9:30 in the morning, and normally I intermittent fast, so I was admittedly pretty irritable and hungry, even with popcorn for breakfast before the movie started, but I've seen movies at earlier times with even less sleep or food that were so good they were worth it, and for the first half hour, I thought this would be one of them. Then this happened. Based on the novel by William S. Burroughs, Daniel Craig plays Lee, a loner living in 1950s Mexico who falls for a younger man named Eugene, played by Starkey, believing he can finally establish a meaningful connection with someone despite Eugene's denial of their forbidden feelings. If this plot sounds even vaguely familiar, it's because it's from the same director, but these two are actual adults, so you won't have to feel guilty if you like the movie. And yeah, I know Italy's laws are different, it's a work of fiction, not a documentary, but Luca Guadagnino has always had an age is just a number mentality, and make what you will of that. And honestly, Guadagnino's last couple movies were so hit and miss, I was reluctant at first to even check this out, but at the last second of looking for movies to see at TIFF, I decided, fuck it, I have a little bit of free time that day, I'll give it a chance, hope that it's a return to form, and hope can only really do so much, can't it? I'll say this, when Guadagnino's direction works, it visually portrays the romance in a way that regardless of the audience's sexuality, anyone can get attached to these characters' relationship. There's been a lot of talk about the sex scenes in this, and it's a little exaggerated. You can count the number of them on one hand. It's how full frontal the actors were willing to go to sell their performances, and how much time they take. You know what, this is gonna sound fucking dirty regardless. Look, you all know what I mean. Why did I do that? Look, that's what makes it shocking. You all get the idea. Moving on. When the actors' committed eye contact and body language towards one another match the musical score and sound design, which alternates from passionate to intense depending on the mood, you believe these two are genuinely intimate with one another. And when it's just the two of them living their lives, there's great use of slow motion and music to show Lee's attraction to Eugene and the dreamlike hallucinations of how he wishes they could be intimate in public. And speaking of Lee, everyone's been saying this, and it's absolutely true. Daniel Craig gives one of his best performances, proving he can play a more lonely, flawed, and vulnerable man. In this case, a pseudo-intellectual who waxes poetic about his thoughts on life in order to look sophisticated. And it works for and against him at the same time, where it shows he's capable of being a compassionate and smart man, but when questioned on his own faults, like his drug use or whatever tragic past he's tried suppressing, he starts stuttering and trailing off, and all that intellect just washes away. He's pathetic but sympathetic, and has great chemistry with Starkey, who I would argue is actually more impressive than Craig, because he has half the dialogue and yet is able to sell so much more emotion with just the subtle change of expression, like the raised eyebrow or just looking off into space in order to compress his feelings. And while he's not in it enough to contribute that much to the plot, Bobby Moynihan— sorry, that's Jason Schwartzman, is hilarious as the snarky best friend. Unfortunately, like his last few movies, there are just so many stylistic choices that Guadagnino throws in to look artsy rather than actually contribute to the story. One thing that really pissed me off is that this is a movie where there's always music in the background and foreground. Music's so loud that it constantly drowns out the dialogue, especially when we need to hear what they're saying. There's one point halfway through the movie as the main couple go on a road trip of South America that, out of nowhere, the scene transitions suddenly become these Mr. Rogers-style miniatures of cities and airplanes filled with really awful green screening, almost as if Wes Anderson suddenly made an Indiana Jones travel montage. There are so many choices like that that just didn't gel with the rest of the tone. And the amount of dream sequences in this not only feels excessive, in my opinion, they don't give you enough clues of the tragic past that Lee's desperately trying to run away from. They're just surreal images for the sake of being surreal. Especially a William Tell reference that, if you're familiar with William Burroughs, you just sit there and go, well, of course they fucking threw that in there. It'd be one thing if the characters were interesting enough to sit through underdeveloped symbolism, but as good as the acting is here, you barely learn shit about these two. Or at least enough for us to like them. We know their faults. Lee's a junkie, Eugene's in denial of his sexuality, but that's the most we get. And if you're gonna say their pasts are supposed to be up for interpretation, like I said about the dream sequences, there aren't enough clues on screen for us to really interpret. In the opening credits, Lee lays out a handful of guns, pairs of glasses, and passports for him to use, and it's completely pointless. He never fires a gun, at least not in real life anyways. And he blurts out that he's a fugitive at times where it would be much more convenient and wise not to mention that. Eugene, other than being a Navy seaman, I can't even pretend to be mad about that one. I mean, that just writes itself. That's the most we get about his past. The online synopsis said that he was a student of some kind. Of what, I'm not sure. I don't remember him talking about it or even studying for anything, so that's already out the window. There are no other soldiers who recognize or flirt with him. There's a girlfriend of his who might actually be his beard, who I don't think even had a line of dialogue. She was just a background extra whenever she was in the scene. Now you might be wondering, how does a 2-hour, 15-minute movie that feels even longer, and we'll fucking get to that, have so much missing context? Because it was originally supposed to be 3 hours. The original cut that Guadagnino had was either 180 or 200 minutes. And my god, it is so fucking obvious that they cut most of it out of the first half, kind of where we need context most in order to understand the relationship. And yet it still failed at tightening the pacing because for the second half of the movie, it mainly centers on Lee and Eugene taking a trip to South America in order to find and trip on ayahuasca, which should be the best part of the movie, but it was so fucking boring because it does the exact same scenarios over and over again where they stop from one city to another and engage in the exact same self-destructive behavior of doing drugs, fighting with each other, denying who they are, one of them even prostituting himself to the other as part of a travel agreement. Because, yeah, that's how I connect with these guys. And it feels like an hour goes by before they're even introduced to the ayahuasca, and we get Lesley Manville as this weird doctor/shaman with a bizarre, cartoony sense of humor that, again, doesn't gel with the rest of the movie. And even after they take the ayahuasca, there's still what feels like a half hour left in the movie where each scene you think it's gonna end, and you think it would actually be a better ending to leave it on this note where it's left up to imagination. There's a bittersweet element to it, and then it just keeps going on and on. I'm genuinely curious. In the first half of the movie, why is there a 10-minute take of Lee shooting up on H in order to explain how lonely he is and how he deals with his pain when there are several scenes beforehand that already established it and established it better in a shorter amount of time, when showing whatever redeeming qualities these guys have matter most to the story? Other than they're queer and they're in pain over the fact that they can't express themselves in public, why should I care about them? Even if the story takes place in a time period where gay people were unjustly persecuted for being who they were, would you still rather have an interesting gay character or an interesting gay character? Because there is a difference, and I think Guadagnino was trying to lean on one and ended up settling for the other. If there's ever a director's cut, I might give it the benefit of a doubt because there would at least be context surrounding why I should care about the relationship, because in the theatrical cut that I got at TIFF, it was sorely lacking. And someone's gonna make a dirty pun out of that regardless, so it's boring, don't see it, one of A24's worst movies. I'm blown away they even settled on this, but in any case, guys, thanks as always for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Queer. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, be sure to check me out on Patreon and buy me a coffee, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.